Well, if you weren't here last week, would tell you that you have come on the second week of 3. We are in our our family series that we are calling Strong Families in a Stormy World. Strong Families in a Stormy World is the idea that because we believe that strong families make strong communities here at Boulevard, that we want to make a stronger community. We want to make a stronger world. And so we want our families to be healthy in what God has them to be. And we're doing that. We're attempting to do that in a world that is forever getting more difficult to have marriages and raise our children in a way that honors God. That's what we're about. This is week 2. Last week in week 1, we found Israel, God's children, on the east bank of the Jordan River after being in a time of slavery in Egypt, after coming through the desert, 40 years there in the desert, they come in. God says basically 2 things to them. He says, hey, you got to make a choice whether at this point in time you're really going to follow me or not. And 2, when you make that choice, you need to make sure that you are going to stay the course. Make the choice, stay the course, kind of proceed with caution is what we talked about, and why we need to proceed with caution as we continue to follow God. That was last week. This week we're rolling several hundred years ahead, and we find ourselves with a young man by the name of Daniel with some other friends in a book named after him and written by him, a book by the name of Daniel. And you're saying maybe if you, how many of you would consider yourself like having grown up in the church? Raise your hand if you kind of, all right, some yes, some no, all right, okay. And so you're probably thinking, oh, know this, Steve, I can sleep for the next 30 minutes, okay. Daniel and the lion's den. That's right, Daniel and the lion's den, all right? And so the whole idea of Daniel and the lion's den, we know, is that anytime that we ever get in trouble as God's children, he just plucks us right out and delivers us, right? No. Okay, that's not the theme of Daniel or that story necessarily, all right? Or some of you might be into the prophecy thing towards the end of the book, right? You know, and you're going, oh yeah, okay. The idea is if we can just figure out all of what those weird faces and numbers and signs mean, we can know exactly what's going to happen in the future, right? No, not exactly. That's not what we're talking about today. Neither Daniel in the lion's den or the prophetic stuff, and that's all good, and there's stories to be learned, but that's not where we are at on this very day. And what we do is we find Daniel and his friends in the lion's den. Or excuse me, I just said we weren't going to be there, and we're not. All right, we find Daniel and his friends in Babylon, and Babylon is this. Babylon's a bad place. Babylon, we know, is a long, long, long way from Jerusalem. And I would just tell you, just for starters, that in this particular part of the story, Daniel and his friends give us this incredibly great example, this with just a sharp picture of what it takes for you and I and our families to thrive and actually become influential in a very, very stormy culture. Now, let me add a little bit of punch to this story because I think it will help. First of all, you have to know, last week we talked for just a moment about sometimes the fact that we get in marriage cycles. Well, Israel, God's children, have been for hundreds of years. Basically, since they entered the promised land from the Jordan, they have been in this cycle, okay, of, yes, God will serve you, then the slow fade, then entirely disobedient, then God disciplines them, then they go, okay, I'm sorry, we're sorry, we'll get it right, then they get it right, then they grow disobedient, then God disciplines them, then they repent and go, we're sorry. You get the cycle? That cycle has been there for a long, long time for Israel. To the point where God finally pulls the plug and says, enough. Enough. I've told you for years that if you didn't get it right, I was going to remove you, the people of Israel, my children, from your promised land, and I was going to take you to a very, very far away country. That's the past. The present is that that's exactly what has happened. God has allowed the army of Nebuchadnezzar, the army of Babylon, this incredibly great army that he has told them about for a long, long time, is going to come and sweep over them if they don't get it right. And in Daniel 1:1, if you've got your Bibles open, it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and he besieged it. And that means only basically that he camped his entire army around the city of Jerusalem, and nothing was going in and nothing was going out, and eventually you run out of all the things needed to survive. And he waited long enough, and then he began to take the people of Jerusalem, starting with the young royalty and those kind of people of the court. He began to remove those people down to a long, long trip to Babylon. How long, you ask? You know how long this trip is, folks? About 900 miles. 900 miles. And the speed limit is not 75. All right? 900 miles. We know from the book of Ezra that this from Ezra's trip from Jerusalem to Babylon, that trip took about 4 months. That's a long time to think about the fact that you're making the trip because you or the people around you were disobedient. And folks, I want to tell you, when they get there, this is no Jerusalem. Babylon is a bad, bad place. Why is it bad? Because Babylon has an amazingly bad king. A king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, that if you read more into the book, and even as we look at it a little bit today, you're going to find out is a really bad dude. He is evil in every sense. He makes Hitler look like a nice guy. He's an egomaniac. He demands complete obedience. He begins to believe he is God himself. All that and more. Not only that, but Babylon also has this religion that is, we talked about last week that the ites worship Baal. Well, the Babylonians worshipped, had a god that was named Marduk, all right? Also called Bel, not Baal, but Bel, but the two of them are close enough together. And this was a horrible religion and ended up on all kinds of immorality and sacrifices. Not only that, but they had this incredible education system. This education system basically meant that they would bring these young men from Jerusalem in, and a couple things would happen. One, that they would teach them the languages and the literature of Babylon. They would begin to change the minds of these young men. And then also, it will tell us in chapter 1 that they would begin to change their diet. And they would actually take the food that they were used to and they would replace it with food from the king's table. And then eventually they would actually give them a new name. Now let me tell you, I was looking at this. I was reading this actually not even necessarily in preparation for this series. And as I realized, as I looked at this, I thought, that curriculum of Babylon, that is evil. That is terrible. That is ugly, and it is perfect. Ugly and evil and perfect. Because someone, though evil, had realized that if I want to take someone, a young man, per chance, from another country who had different beliefs, and I want to completely transform that young man or that young woman into what I want them to be, so they can not be influencers there, but they actually can be influencers in my country, here's how you go about it. You retrain their mind. You retrain their appetite and their desires, and you change their identity. It's evil, and it's perfect at the same time. Evil in its curriculum, perfect in its strategy. And I began to think about this, and I began to realize that, you know what? This is the perfect curriculum for parents. This is the perfect curriculum for parents and their kids. That as we are seeking to build influencers and help our children become influencers in a culture that is much like Babylon, that these are things that we need to think about and possibly do. Nebuchadnezzar's idea was to take these young men, and change their mind in such a way that they would actually become influences in Babylon for Babylon. But here's the cool part of the story. And there's a lot of cool part of the story, but here's one of the greatest things about this, is that Nebuchadnezzar does not take into account that God is going to swoop in. Don't you love it when God swoops into your story? When you're reading something in the Bible and you realize, hey, man, this looks like there's no hope here. Or you're experiencing something in your life and you realize, and you think, man, there doesn't seem to be any hope. And then all of a sudden you see God swooping in. God swoops in to Daniel 1. And so as opposed to these young men becoming influencers in Babylon for Babylon, God takes these very same things that the Babylon curriculum is trying to teach them and uses them so that they become influencers in Babylon for God. We're talking about strong families in a stormy world. And I just want to, just a moment, I just need to kind of part the cloud here and talk with you just a second. As I get older in this role here, one of my fears sometimes, I'm just being really honest with you, is that I would become that guy as he gets older that becomes the doomsday. All these young families, what's the problem with these kids? When I was growing up, when we were raising our kids, we did. And I don't ever want to become that. And I find myself, because as we get older, I think we just kind of settle in sometimes. I don't want to become that. I believe so many of our young families are doing so many things so much better than we did a generation before. I believe that with all my heart. But I also want you to know that we have to, if we believe that strong families, that healthy, godly families are going to make a strong church and a strong community, then we do have to, right? Would you agree with me? We have to deal in realities. And the reality, folks, that is that we are dealing right now in a culture that is going haywire in a fast way. That moral fabric of this culture that we call America is coming apart at the seams. I was looking at some birthday cards the other day for Dawn, and I got to tell you, maybe I'm prudish. I've never seen language like that in locker rooms, and this was put out by Hallmark. I was like, whoa, what is that about? About 3 out of 4 cards involved some kind of drinking escapade or some kind of unfaithfulness or something that just wasn't right. This last week, I spoke to 500 junior high boys about sexual purity, and they were an incredibly courteous, polite audience for the most part. Something happened that when I mentioned towards the end, I talk about pornography, and I mentioned pornography, and a whole lot of the guys laughed, and some of them clapped. And I thought to myself, I don't think that's the direction that we want to go here. And so sometimes now what was shameful is now being celebrated. I was reminded that when Dawn and I moved here in '83, we moved in, we had a little house on Chestnut, and some people came across the street, and they were some older folks, and I noticed a couple of things. We met, like the first 2 couples we met, or first several people we met, the first one said, I can't remember their name, we're Mr. and Mrs., and they were old folks, and we're Mr. and Mrs., and we're Presbyterians. Their name and their denomination. And Mrs., what's her name next door? Lady next door came over, and she said, hello, I'm Mrs., and I'm Methodist. And I thought, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that was kind of who we were. And almost, and anymore, we're in a culture that doesn't, I'm not saying it should have been important. I'm just saying it's just really different. And I have found where I was glad to be able to tell people I was a pastor, and I'm still proud of it, but I'm less likely to put that out because where people were more accepting and respectful, now you're not exactly sure how people will respond in those situations. Well, let me say again, because I don't want you to miss the purpose of Daniel. We are talking about Daniel and his friends who are living in this kind of culture, and because of the life that they have and the characteristics that they have, they are able to become influencers in that very culture. Here's the first thing I want you to know, that when Daniel comes in and they say, hey, we're going to teach you the literature, and all the history and the language of the Chaldeans or the Babylonians. And the idea is this, that the right teaching brings real wisdom. And so when these guys enroll at Babylon University, it's against their will. Keep in mind that this is against their will, that this is not something that where they are willingly going, but also keep in mind that they are not vacationing. I mean, this is not something that they're just like, hey, I want to go to that school. I'm here because I want to be. No, they are exiled. They are captives. And so they're going to do, for the most part, what the Babylonian government tells them to do. And so they are enrolled at BU, and there it says for a 3-year period that they are involved in literature and the language of the Babylonians. Now, real quickly, it's important that we know that anytime somebody writes something, anytime somebody sings something, anytime somebody really even says something, folks, our worldview, their worldview is behind that, whether they want it to be or not. It comes from who they are. And our worldview comes from our basic convictions and beliefs about what makes this world tick. And so they are immediately, when they're reading the literature of the Chaldeans, of the Babylonians, they are being immersed in the worldview. And I can tell you for certainly that was a godless view. That God had no part, as far as the Chaldeans were concerned, about God had no part in their history. Maybe some of their gods, but not the God that we serve. When we hear something, when we read something, whatever that is, that medium is, folks, we have to realize that that is coming from a particular person's worldview. The same with our kids. And we don't know exactly what their foundation was. Some people think they had been immersed in Scripture when they were in Jerusalem. Some people thought because the disobedience at that time that they probably didn't know a whole lot of Scripture. What we do know is this. What we do know is in Daniel 1:17, if you want to look there, this is interesting. That in the midst of this immersion in Chaldean language and literature, where they are hopefully, the Babylonians hope these guys will buy into their worldview, which again is godless. Daniel 1:17 says, to these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. That's interesting, isn't it? It's all we got. And so I don't want to read too much into it. To these 4 young men, God gave. Now, we know they're in a 3-year school in the Babylonian University, and they're being immersed in all this other stuff. But somehow, in the midst of that, I don't know if it's through a mentor. I don't know how he did it. But we know that God said, hey, if these guys' minds are going to be saved, I'm going to have to teach them something other than what they're getting here. And so he gives them understanding and knowledge in all kinds of literature and learning. And it says even kind of a little extra gift to Daniel. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. And if you know any of the story, you know that's going to come in incredibly handy. And we find out in Daniel 1:18 and 19, when the test is there, at the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than his own magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. Interesting. See, we know that the right teaching brings real wisdom. The right teaching brings real wisdom. See, godly wisdom, folks, is this. Godly wisdom. We always think about being the old man or the mature woman who has this kind of wisdom. Who, it takes years and years to accumulate this wisdom. Godly wisdom is this. It is taking the truth of God's word and the truth of God's character and his track record and using it to interpret what is going on in the world around me and in the community around me and in my personal life. And it doesn't take years and years. It takes someone who's been immersed in the truth of God, looking for answers and willing to apply that to his life and all that is going around him. That's godly wisdom. And you and I have met. You and I have met older people who have no wisdom. They're still getting the interpretation wrong. They're still making the same mistakes at 75 that they did at 5 and 17. And you and I have met some people who are 7 and 9 and 10 who have an incredible amount of wisdom in their life. And folks, let me tell you, we talked just for a moment, a little bit last week, we talked about the ites and the isms. We talked about this idea of postmodernism, the idea that there is no absolute truth in the world. We talked about the fact that it breeds relativism. The idea that basically whatever I believe is okay for me and whatever you believe is okay for you, and you don't get your stuff in my lawn and I won't get my stuff in your lawn. Just do as you please. If it makes you happy, that's okay. We declare our own truth. That's relativism. We talked about something called pluralism that we hear again all the time. All roads go to the same spot. That's pluralism. And all are completely diametrically opposed to what we hear and what we read in God's Word. And folks, I can promise you this. And again, I don't mean to be doomsday. I'm just telling you it is absolutely the truth. I can tell you, I can promise that your children are being invaded and exposed and bombed with all types of isms every day through every medium that they open, through every screen, in their teachings, because it is a part of the curriculum. And God is not. And so we must, as parents and grandparents, we must make sure that they are learning the truth of Scripture so what they learn here can be tested with what we have here. And if we're not doing that, their minds are open to all kinds of crazy things. Now, we know there's all kinds of ways the isms do that. Sometimes they do this like, you're not serious. They say this kind of stuff to our kids in college. You're not serious. You don't really believe that. And so it's this kind of mocking kind of a thing, like anybody serious wouldn't actually believe that. So you don't really believe that, do you? And it leads our kids to believe that only idiots would believe in something like absolute truth and God and the truth we see here. And they do kind of things like where they do this emotional kind of stuff where they create a story. And the story draws our emotions in, but when we realize when we get pulled in that we've been drawn into something that it is not true. And though it may need our mercy, it doesn't need us to side with those things. It's interesting in Daniel 2:36 that when Daniel or Nebuchadnezzar brings Daniel into the situation, that when he interprets the dream, that Daniel's interpretation that gets him to the top of the class includes God. His interpretation, he has not been so influenced by the isms, by the teaching of the Chaldeans and Babylonians at BU, that he loses sight of the fact that here's the story and here's what went on, here's the dream, but really the wider angle lens, as we pull back, is that God is involved. And I would remind you that God is involved in all the things that we're part of. So as teachers, how do we do this? As parents, let me just encourage you to that we consistently in the Word, that we intentionally teach God's Word. And not only teaching it, maybe at night or whatever, we also are taking the situations our children are in and saying, hey, let's look at that. What did you hear today at school? What are your friends saying? Well, what are you talking about in school, wherever you're at? What are you talking about? Let's take this and put this on Scripture and see how it comes out. That we open up and keep open the lines of communication. So sometimes our kids are going to blow our minds with the things that they hear, right? And we need to make sure that we are keeping up communication with them and listening. It's really easy when we hear our kids say something that is absolutely contrary to what we believe as Christians. We want to go, what? What? I can't believe we've never taught you that way. Where did you come up with that kind of thing? We need to back it up and just listen and not be quite so reactive and continue chiseling away and realize that most of the time, not always, they will come around and begin to see what the truth is. Right teaching brings real wisdom. And the second thing that the Babylon University did was they took these kids, and it says Ashpenaz, who was one of the king's officials, took them, and he said, hey, listen, we're going to take away your diet, and we're going to put in another diet. We're going to begin to give you food off the king's table. Well, that sounds pretty good. Food off the king's table. Let me remind you this. Our diet determines our desires. Our diet determines our desires. I realized a number of years ago when I began to change my diet, I began to realize that for a long time, I desired to eat what I had eaten before for a long, long time. And then I began to realize, and so at first this was really, really tough because I was like, I knew I couldn't eat that stuff, and so I was eating this stuff, and it was like, I don't really want this stuff. I didn't want to put it in my mouth, and it wasn't real tasty. And then you know what I realized? Kind of a cool thing. I began to realize that I began to get a desire for actually this type of food. And when I went back to some of this stuff, which sometimes I still did desire, it left me feeling kind of weird inside. And I think that's not only physical, but I think that's true in a lot of ways in our whole lives. Our diet determines our desires. You remember the old deal that said G-I-G-O? What is G-I-G-O? Garbage in. That's right. Garbage in, garbage out. But you know what is also true? Garbage in, garbage in. Because what we eat is exactly what we want to continue eating. We get a desire for that. And that, honestly, should scare us to death. Not only physically, but whatever we are putting in our minds, whatever we are putting in our souls. Because it never satisfies. We always want more. Our desire, our diet, determines our desires. You know, I was thinking about the other day, I was actually having some quiet time. And I realized how often I was having a quiet time, and all of a sudden, I find myself reaching for my phone, and it's not even buzzing. And I'm checking an app, I'm checking the weather, I'm checking ESPN, and I'm thinking, what is this about? It's not even calling me. But something about that becomes to be a desire of my heart. I want to know what is going on around me. I become fearful that I might miss something. Our diet determines our desires. Dr. Tim Jennings, who is a neuropsychologist, says this: any type of repetitive behavior will create trails in your brain that are going to fire in an automated sequence. Porn is the ultimate trailblazer. Pornography is the ultimate trailblazer. That there are actually neurochemicals in your brain when a man or a woman, and women watching porn is becoming much, much more prevalent in this generation than ever before. And so there are actually neurochemicals that are released in the brain, the same neurochemicals that happen when you put drugs in your body that create that high kind of thing. That when that happens, we become actually bonded to the image. And you and I know this, that those things, like any sinful situation, like any fantasy, never satisfy. We only want more of them, and we want more of it. And the type of things that we see at first immediately satisfy, even shock, and leave us feeling shameful, eventually wear off, and we want something more and more. And you know, I can just tell you, I'm not just talking about pornography here. I'm talking about things like social media and screen times. And it scares me, folks, how much the fact that it stirs up all emotions. And you know, do you know that one of the characteristics of dysfunctional families is that they can only survive when there's a high level of emotion going on? Now think about that. Because think about when you go to Facebook or when you go to Instagram or when you go to so much of the screen stuff, you go to stuff that creates emotion. And pretty soon you find yourself going back and you're there almost constantly, and it's creating this emotions, and it kind of feels good. It's like, yeah, I'm angry about that. I'm really sad about that. I'm really happy about that. I'm frustrated about that. And pretty soon we're just living with all these emotions. And it's like we can't live without those high emotions going on. It's this unreal reality. You know what scares me as much as anything is just the fact that it's relentless. I'm not just talking about pornography. I'm talking about screen time, whatever medium it might be for you. I'm talking about the fact that it's always there. It's always in front of us. And let me just say to you that Philippians 4:8-9 says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And then here's verse 9. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. And that's important because it tells us what we're supposed to be thinking about and who gave it to us. And as parents, Paul says, I set you an example, and so we are supposed to set that example for our children of what we have our face in and what we are spending time with. And the promise is that God of peace will be with us. We won't have that uncertainty, that unrest in our hearts. Had this weird thing happen to me this morning. Unwelcome. I want to talk with you this morning because the last thing that we see happening is that Daniel is given a new name. He's given a new name. He's given the name Belshazzar. And it literally means basically son of Bel. Or, in modern day terms, he was given the name son of Satan, essentially, okay? Son of Satan. That's what they wanted his name to be. And a name is essentially our identity. And we find out that Daniel's name meant, in Hebrew Daniel's name meant, God is my judge. A reminder that God is there for him, an advocate, all right? A just person, a just God. And I was sitting there this morning and I realized, folks, that I had this point that I wanted to make. And I wanted to really make it clear, and I realized that I was unclear myself. I thought to myself, I think we got a problem. Because I've been all this studying on it for several weeks. I've probably spent more time studying on this particular thing than anything else, but then I realized when I sat down, it's like, okay, this is not clear in my head. If it's not clear in my head, it's not going to be clear in their heads either. And so here's the deal. Here's what I've come up with, since 6 this morning, okay? Right identity brings true humility. Right identity brings true humility. And I'm going to say this, that we have what we call a self-identity, and our self-identity is I would define it as how you see yourself. And that's important, how you see yourself. And what makes up that self-identity? Well, our past, our people, our personality, our purpose, our priorities in our life, all those things make up our self-identity. But then we have what I would call our true identity, or just identity. And that is this. That is seeing myself as God sees me. And all those other things are important, and they are a piece of what God uses for me to create my identity. They are not my identity, and any of them can be changed or lost in some way. God uses those P's of people and personality and purpose. He uses all those things. Sometimes he uses those things, he uses painful experiences from our past. Sometimes he uses the gift in our personality or the talents we have. But at that core, your and I identity is in who God is, folks. And it's what he has done for you and I, and it's in our response for that. And a lot of things changed in Daniel's life. Going 900 miles from Jerusalem to Babylon and being immersed at BU for 3 years in all the literature and all kinds of other things changed about his life. But if you read the book of Daniel, what we realize is this. Daniel keeps calling himself Daniel. It's his identity. And he refuses to change his identity. God is my judge. He will not see himself. He will not measure himself by the measuring of Babylon. He may be immersed because he has to be immersed. He may at some point in time even have to eat their food. Although we realize that the food he ate actually made him healthier. He made a choice to eat other food, and the food he ate was healthier than the king's food that they gave him. He got to keep his diet at least for a while. but he keeps his name. He keeps his name. And folks, I want you to know for our kids that it's important. It's important that we make sure our kids' identity is not found in what they do. It is not found in what they are or what they are not. It is not found necessarily in their past, that those things can be important. And it's really easy. We have very few joys as a parent than helping our kids find out the good things, the things that they can become good at. Isn't that true? I mean, that's fun. I watched my grandson who's been playing drums for some time, and we had this little worship service with the grandkids down when we were in Destin last week. And one of them was praying, and one of them was singing, and one of them was actually doing a little teaching. And Cannon just stood behind everybody while we were singing worship songs together, and he had something he was actually pounding on his chest because he plays drums, and he's a pretty good little drummer. And he was just smiling and singing and worshiping. And I was realized this, that the things that God gives us that we can do, that we are good at, whether it's sports or academics or music or whatever it might be, that those things are intended to be vessels that he brings glory to himself through. That's important, parents. That they are not the thing to be focused on. They are a gift of God that God wants his children, those he gives that gift to take that and go, God, you gave this to me, and so I'm going to figure out a way to serve you in this. And as parents, it is very easy. And I have made the mistake of making the gift the object of adoration. And so I spend all my resources and I spend all my time trying to make sure that child is the very best so they can feel good about themselves. Ooh, that's a bad road to go down. Because there's always going to be somebody better. Always. And they may be champion this year, but next year they will not. And they may not get what they were aiming for. And even if they do, it is short term. And so we have to make sure that our children's identity is found in Christ and not in what they do. Be careful, folks. Be careful, parents. Be careful of what you pursue with your kids and to what level of energy you put into them so that their identity, so they can feel good about themselves. That is a scary road. Well, a good identity brings about humility. And let me just say this, that humility is much needed in this world, isn't it? Humility is needed in our world. What is humility? Humility is not putting myself down. Oh, I'm nothing. No, humility is knowing what God has given me, knowing my strengths, being able to succeed in those areas, and be able to say, hey, I can help in this situation, and I move into that situation. But then but you know what? I did it because God helped me. And if you look at Daniel, you'll see that even though he knew he could dream dreams, that when the time came, when the crisis came, he goes to God and says, God, you are the God who gave me the ability to do this. Please give me mercy. He knows what he has, but he knows who the giver is. And so he does not focus on the gift. He knows who the giver is. And he takes that and he uses it for the purposes of God. And folks, man, if there's any parental lesson in this, if there's anything that you can sink your teeth into, your claws into, you got to get this for your kids, and we got to get it for us as adults. We know who we are. We know what the gifts that God has given us. We know that he is the giver of the gifts, and we use it for his purposes. One of the things we do in staying humble and having humility in our life is serving God, teaching our kids to serve God by watching us and by putting them in certain situations where they are serving others. And one of the things you notice is, although immersed in this incredibly evil culture, that Daniel and his friends seem to have this respect that anytime he goes towards Nebuchadnezzar, this man who is evil, who is bad in every kind of situation, you know how he refers to him? Majesty. Majesty. He respects the role. And in this day and age, and in our culture, this is an important lesson. He respects the role. He speaks openly of his God, but he respects the role. And there comes a time when Nebuchadnezzar will say, bow. And Daniel does not bow. But in humility, because he knows who he is and he knows who's behind him, he respects, he does not bow. And we need to be teaching that type of humility and servanthood in our children's lives and make sure that we have it ourselves. I want to challenge you today as we end today, folks. I want to challenge you 3 things. 1, I want to challenge you to write out an identity statement for yourself. To write out an identity statement for yourself. I wrote this recently. I'm a son of the Father. I am dearly loved. As a result of his death, I am forgiven and I'm brought into relationship with my Father. As a result of Christ's resurrection, I am no longer a slave to the control of sin. I have hope for today and for eternity. And as a result of his Holy Spirit, I am gifted to bring Christ to others. Guided daily in my path, empowered for loving and obedience. My love is for Jesus. My hope and my trust is in Jesus. That is my identity. And I want to encourage you as family to sit down with your kids this week. You can write out what their self-identity is, some of the things that they, in their past, and some of the gifts they have, write some of those things. Write out there, I'd help them write their identity, something they can come back to. You write your own, help them write their own. And then I would encourage you as a family to have a tribal meeting and talk about the specific environment where you can be influencers in your life. Are you on a ball team? Are you involved in school? Are you doing things with the neighbors? What environment can you bring real true wisdom to and humility and respect in your family or in your individual lives? Take a moment. Take a moment to sit down with your kids and make sure they understand where their identity lies. That is so, so important. Our identity is in Christ if we have chosen Christ. He is a good, good Father. He's a good, good Father if we have chosen that. And I encourage you today, wherever you're at in your life, that you might make a decision to allow him to become a Father who has given his Son to bring you into relationship with the Father. Because we have sin in our life, and we need to do something about that sin. And the only thing we can do to take that away is to accept the gift that God, the good Father, has given us so that we can become a child. That sin is taken away. If you have questions about that, we'd love for you to come, and we'd love to have that conversation with you. All right? Let's stand and sing together.